I ignored her. For 8 whole months. I, Cole Ramsey, a lonely rancher with calloused hands, a silent house, and a heart I'd locked up tighter than a barn door in a winter storm. Ignored the one woman who had ever looked at me like I was worth looking at. She wasn't just any woman. She was Nora Calloway, my sister's best friend. Educated. Respected. The daughter of the most admired family in all of Ember Creek, Texas. A woman who healed the sick, fed the grieving, and somehow, in the middle of all that goodness, had found time to see me. But I turned my back on every single bit of it. I told myself it was the honorable thing. The practical thing. A worn-down, debt-carrying rancher had no business reaching for a woman like Nora Calloway. So I kept my head down, my distance wide, and my feelings buried so deep even the Texas bedrock couldn't find them. But Nora Calloway wasn't built for being ignored. Because on a cold, rain-soaked night, at 1 a.m., when any sensible woman would have been asleep, she knocked on my door. And when I opened it, standing there soaked to the bone in the darkness, she looked me dead in the eyes and said 7 words that cracked something open in my chest I hadn't known was still alive. "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." But here's what she didn't know. The truth I'd been hiding wasn't just about her. It was about the one moment 8 months earlier at the old water well, the moment I almost let myself have something real, and exactly what I'd been planning to do by sunrise that very morning that would have changed everything. Forever. What was Cole truly hiding? And was Nora ready for the answer? Keep watching, because what happens on the other side of that door will show you exactly what 8 months of silence really costs a lonely man, and what one brave woman's truth can unlock. I want to tell you something about loneliness before I tell you anything else, because if you don't understand the loneliness, you won't understand any of what comes after. Loneliness doesn't kick the door down. It doesn't announce itself the way grief does, loud and violent and impossible to ignore. No, loneliness is quieter than that. Sneakier. It moves into a house the way dust moves into an empty room. Slowly, without drama, settling into every corner so gradually that one morning you look up from your coffee cup and realize you genuinely cannot remember the last time someone said your name and meant it warmly. That was my life. Cole Ramsey, 34 years old, owner of 400 acres of red clay Texas land, 63 head of cattle, 1 aging barn dog named Scout, and a kitchen table with 4 chairs, only one of which had ever been used in the last 2 years. My father, Hank Ramsey, died on a Tuesday in November. Went in his sleep, which people kept telling me was a blessing, and maybe it was, but it didn't feel like one when I walked into his room that morning and found the silence where his breathing used to be. He left me the ranch, the debt that came with it, and the particular hollow sound a house makes when the last other person who lived inside it is gone. I didn't fall apart. Ramsey men don't fall apart. My father said that so many times it had become something close to law. So I got up the next morning before dawn, the way I always had, fed the cattle, mended what needed mending, and kept moving, kept working, kept my head down and my hands busy, and told myself that a man with enough work to do doesn't have room inside him for falling apart. I was wrong about that, but I was very convincing. My sister June was 24 and full of life and laughter, and she came every Sunday for supper and talked enough for both of us while I ate and nodded and felt grateful for the noise even though I never once told her so. She worried about me. I could see it in the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, that careful, searching look that wanted to find something wrong so she could fix it. I gave her nothing to find. I was fine. I was always fine. I was the most convincingly fine man in all of Ember Creek, Texas. And I was, in the quietest and most unfixable way, completely alone. That was my life on the April morning that Nora Calloway rode up my clay road and parked her horse at my gate and walked into my world like she'd always belonged in it, though I didn't understand that yet. I didn't understand much of anything yet. She came with June that first time, the two of them laughing about something before they'd even dismounted, their voices carrying across the yard in the warm morning air. I'd seen Nora Calloway before. Ember Creek was a small town, the kind where every face is a familiar one, but I had never had occasion to actually be in the same space with her for any length of time. She was Edmund Calloway's daughter. The Calloways ran the general store and the apothecary. Her mother, May, was the woman the town sent for when there was sickness or sorrow, and Nora had grown up at her side, learning the medicines and the remedies and the particular grace of sitting with someone in their pain without trying to rush them out of it. She climbed down from her horse in my yard that April morning and pushed her braid back over her shoulder and looked around at the ranch with honest brown eyes. Not the polite, glancing look of someone pretending to be interested, but a real look, slow and thorough and genuine. And she said, "This place is beautiful, Cole. You take care of it all yourself." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Must be a lot of work for one man." "It keeps me busy," I said. She looked at me then. A real look, the same way she'd looked at the ranch, slow and arriving somewhere. And she said quietly, "I imagine it does." And something in those 4 words made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because she hadn't sounded like she was talking about the ranch at all. I went back to my fence post, but I felt her eyes on my back for just a breath longer than was strictly necessary. And then she and June went inside, and I stood there in the morning sun with a fence post in my hands and a feeling in my chest I hadn't felt in a very long time. I ignored it. I was good at that. She started coming most Saturdays after that, and every Saturday I told myself I didn't notice, and every Saturday I noticed everything. I noticed she took her coffee without sugar and never apologized for it. I noticed she laughed at things that were genuinely funny and stayed quiet when they weren't, unlike most people who fill silence with noise just to have something to do with their mouths. I noticed she had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions at all. They were open doors, small and unhurried, that she'd set in front of you and then wait patiently to see if you'd step through. She asked me things no one had asked me in longer than I could honestly count. "Do you like it out here alone, Cole? Or is it just what you know?" I pretended I hadn't heard that one over the sound of the hammer. But it sat with me for 3 days afterward, heavy and specific, like a stone dropped into still water whose ripples wouldn't stop. "What do you think about when you're out riding by yourself?" "The land," I said. "The work. Always. Mostly." She nodded like that was a real answer, but her eyes said she knew it wasn't the whole one. "What are you afraid of, Cole?" she asked once, standing on the porch in the late afternoon while the sky went orange and gold behind the ridge. "You seem like a man who isn't afraid of anything." I looked out toward the horizon for a long time before I said, "Plenty of things." And she said, soft and simple, "Me too." I almost said something then, almost, but I was Cole Ramsey. And Cole Ramsey kept things where they belonged, which was inside, behind the wall, behind the work, behind the kept busy hands and the early mornings and the yes ma'am and the I'm fines. So I said nothing. And the sky finished going gold without us saying another word, and somehow that was one of the best evenings I'd had in 2 years, which should have told me something right there. Told me something. I just refused to listen. June saw everything, of course. June always saw everything. She had my father's eyes for reading people and my mother's mouth for not always telling you what she'd read. And she watched the 2 of us with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a storm build on the horizon. Knowing it's coming, knowing it's going to be something, content to wait it out. She never said a word about it. I was grateful for that. I was also, looking back, a complete fool. Because the weeks went by and the Saturdays kept coming and Nora Calloway kept asking her quiet open-door questions and I kept almost stepping through them and then pulling back at the last second, and the feeling in my chest kept growing, and I kept pretending it wasn't there, and the whole time I was building something without knowing I was building it. The way you don't notice a fire starting until it's already warm. Then came July. And the well. And everything changed, or almost changed. And the almost was the thing that broke me. June had gone into town on a Tuesday for flour and thread and a new almanac she'd been waiting on. Nora had stayed behind because she'd offered to help clear some brush near the water well while June was gone, which was the kind of practical, neighborly thing that made perfect sense in a small Texas town and that I had spent approximately 3 days beforehand telling myself wasn't a big deal at all. We worked through the morning in comfortable silence. That was one of the things about Nora. She understood silence the way most people understand noise. She didn't need to fill it. She moved alongside me without chatter or performance, just working, the way someone works when they're genuinely at ease, and the morning went by warm and unhurried and easier than any morning I could remember. It was close to noon when we ended up at the well. She was washing the dust and clay from her hands over the stone basin. I reached for the new rope coil I'd left on the stone ledge. She reached for it at the same moment. Our hands met on the rope, on the warm, rough stone. Neither of us moved. I don't know how long we stood like that. Time does something strange in moments like that. It doesn't stop, exactly, but it thickens like air before a thunderstorm, like everything has slowed down so the moment can be fully felt. Her hand was under mine on the stone. Her brown eyes came up to meet mine, and they were open and clear and entirely unafraid. Not bold, not demanding, just honest. The way Nora did everything. Just honest and patient, and there. The wind came through the yard and moved a loose strand of hair across her cheek, and she didn't reach up to fix it. She just looked at me, and I looked at her. And in that moment, standing at the water well in the July heat with the Texas sky wide and blue overhead and this woman's hand under mine and her eyes on my face, I felt something crack open in my chest that I hadn't felt crack open in so long that for a second I didn't even recognize what it was. It was wanting. Simple, enormous, terrifying wanting. Not just wanting her, though God help me, I wanted her, but wanting the whole thing she represented. The warmth, the being seen, the open-door questions and the quiet Saturday evenings and the feeling that maybe, a man like me was allowed to have something that felt like this. She was waiting, patient, certain, giving me time to catch up. And I stepped back. I let go of the rope. I picked up my tools. I said something about the heat and the afternoon, and I put 10 feet of air between us in about 3 seconds flat. And I kept my eyes on the ground and my voice flat and level, and I said, "You ought to head back before the afternoon gets worse." And I walked back toward the barn without looking at her once. I heard her say my name. Just once. "Cole." And I kept walking. I stood in the cool dark of the barn with my back flat against the wall and my eyes closed, and I listened to the sounds of the yard. The cattle in the distance, the dogs sleeping near the gate, the wind in the grass, and then, after a long while, the sound of her horse moving down the clay road away from me. And when that sound faded out to nothing, I put both hands against the barn wall and I stood there in the silence, and I made a decision. I decided it was the right thing, the responsible thing, the honorable thing, the only sensible thing a man in my position could do, because the facts were what they were. I was Cole Ramsey, 34 years old, with debt on my land and dirt on my hands and a life that had been built for one person and showed no signs of being built for two. And she was Nora Calloway, Edmund Calloway's daughter, a woman with education and standing and a future that deserved more than what I could offer. Wanting her was one thing. Reaching for her was another. And a man who understood his place in the world didn't reach for things that weren't his to reach for. I told myself this every night for the next 8 months. I got very good at believing it. What I did after the well was quiet and methodical and total. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply became unavailable in every way that mattered. When Nora came on Saturdays, I found work on the far end of the ranch. When she joined us for supper, I answered in single words and kept my eyes away from hers. I was never unkind. I didn't know how to be unkind. And besides, that would have required acknowledging that something existed between us, and I was dedicated to the position that nothing did. I was a closed door. Polite, distant, gone. She noticed immediately. She tried at first. She came 2 more Saturdays and watched me find reasons to be elsewhere, and I saw the confusion cross her face. That slight tightening around the eyes, that small careful stillness, and I looked away before it could do anything to me. She asked June quietly if she'd said something wrong. June, who was genuinely baffled, said no. I know, because June asked me about it the next Sunday, careful and sideways, the way she approached difficult things. "Nora thinks she offended you somehow." "She didn't," I said. "Then why?" "June. She let it go. She always let it go eventually, because she loved me and because pushing a Ramsey man past his wall was about as productive as pushing against the side of a mountain." By September, Nora came less. By November, she stopped coming on Saturdays almost entirely. By December, when she did come, it was briefly and with a brightness in her manner that I recognized as the kind of brightness people put on over hurt. Vivid and slightly too deliberate, the way you hold a candle very still when the wind picks up. I told myself this was the right outcome. I told myself a lot of things that winter. What I didn't tell myself, what I refused to look at directly, the way you refuse to look directly at the sun, was what those 8 months were actually doing to me. Because the wall I'd built to protect Nora Calloway from a life she didn't deserve was also, quietly and completely, the loneliest thing I had ever constructed. The Saturdays that used to have her voice in them were just Saturdays now. The porch in the evenings, where we'd once stood watching the sky go gold, was just a porch. The supper table had always been set for one, but now it felt like it was set for one in a way that had a name to it, a specific shape, a specific weight. I had been lonely before Nora Calloway. But there is a difference between empty and emptied, and I learned that difference the hard way that winter. I kept working. I kept moving. I didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't let June see more than the surface of it. And somewhere in the gray middle of February, I made another decision. I decided to leave. Not dramatically, not with anger, just practically, cleanly, the way you close a chapter that's gone on long enough. I had heard from a man I respected about a foreman position opening on a large cattle spread in Caldwell County, 40 miles northwest. Good land, better pay, a fresh start on ground that didn't have her in every corner of it. I wrote the letter of inquiry in November. I got the offer in January. I spent 2 weeks holding the contract on my kitchen table, reading it and not reading it, telling myself I was thinking it through when really I was trying to find something in it that would make the decision feel like less of what it actually was. Running. I signed it on a Friday in late February and told myself it was the right thing. I began making arrangements. Quietly. Telling no one. I arranged for my neighbor, old Pete Harlan, to take over management of the cattle. I spoke to the bank about the debt. I packed my saddlebag one afternoon while June was in town. Just the essentials, the things a man actually needs, leaving behind the things that were part of this land and this life and would never belong anywhere else. I wrote June a letter explaining everything, the debt, the opportunity in Caldwell County, the plan. I left out the part about Nora. Some things don't translate into letters. Some things you bury and carry, and that's just how it is. I was leaving at first light. That was the plan. That was what I sat with on the night of March 4th at my kitchen table, with a cold cup of coffee and a lantern burning low and my travel documents spread out before me and Scout asleep at my feet and the rain falling outside in that steady, relentless Texas way that soaks through everything and turns the clay roads into dark mirrors. I sat there for a long time. I looked at the contract. I looked at the letter I'd written June. I looked at the 4 chairs around the table, 3 of which had never been sat in, one of which was worn smooth from years of use by a single person eating single-person suppers in a single-person silence. I told myself I was at peace with this. I was not at peace with this. I was a man sitting in the kitchen he'd been born in, listening to February rain, and feeling with absolute clarity that he was about to do something irreversible, and feeling also, underneath that, with the kind of deep knowing that lives below thought and reason, that he was making the wrong choice for all the right-sounding reasons. But I had signed the contract. And Cole Ramsey didn't go back on his word. The knock came at 5 minutes past 1 in the morning. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Not frantic, not desperate, certain. The knock of someone who had made a decision and was not interested in reconsidering it. I stared at the door from across the kitchen. Nobody knocked on a ranch door in Ember Creek at 1 a.m. unless someone was dying or something was burning. I was at the door in 3 strides, unlatched it and pulled it open. And there she was, Nora Calloway, standing on my porch in the pouring rain. She had a wool coat thrown over what looked like her nightdress, her boots improperly laced like she'd done them in the dark and in a hurry, and her braid half undone, loose strands of it dark with rain plastered to her cheeks and her neck. She was breathing hard, the way you breathe when you've ridden fast through cold weather and then held yourself together through sheer force of will at the last moment. Rain beaded on her coat and ran in thin rivers off the porch overhang behind her. She was soaked. She was windblown. She was standing in my doorway at 1 a.m. in the rain with her boots half-laced and her braid undone. And she was the most remarkable thing I had ever seen in my life. Neither of us said anything for a moment. The rain filled the silence around us, steady and relentless. And she looked at me the way she'd looked at me at the well, open, clear, and entirely, completely unafraid. Then she said, "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." I felt those words land in my chest like something thrown hard against a closed door. Not breaking through yet, but making the whole structure shudder. "Nora," I said, "it's past 1 in the morning. I know what time it is. You rode out here in the rain. I know what I did, Cole." "How did you even know?" "June talks in her sleep when she has a fever," she said, and her voice was steady but underneath it was something tightly held, The way you hold something precious when you're afraid of dropping it. She said your name. And then she said Caldwell County. And then she said don't go. She held my gaze without blinking. I lay there in the spare room for 20 minutes telling myself it was none of my business. She paused. And then I got up and I got on my horse. The rain fell around us and I stood in the doorway and I felt the cold air coming in and I felt something else coming in with it. Something I had spent 8 months boarding up against. Let me in out of the rain, she said. Or come out here with me. I don't care which. But we are going to talk, Cole Ramsey. And you are not going to give me one-word answers. And you are not going to look at the fence post instead of my face. A long moment passed between us. Then I stepped back from the door. She walked in. She stood in my kitchen and looked at the table, the contract, the letter to June, the map of Caldwell County. She took it all in slowly, the way she took everything in, and I watched her face as she understood what she was looking at. Something moved across it, quick and controlled, and then was still. She looked up at me. When were you going to tell June? In the morning, before I left. And me? The question dropped into the room like a stone into deep water, and the silence after it was enormous. There was nothing to tell you, I said. That's not true. Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. But it had weight to it now, the kind that doesn't need volume. Don't say there's nothing to tell. I was at the well with you, Cole. Last July. I was standing right there. I know what that was. I turned toward the window. Outside. The rain pressed against the glass and the clay road beyond the gate shone dark and wet in the night. My reflection looked back at me from the dark pane. Jaw set, eyes tired. The face of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has told himself so many times that it isn't heavy that he's half believed it. It doesn't matter what it was, I said. It matters to me. It shouldn't. Don't. Her voice caught for just a fraction of a second, and that fraction undid me more than anything she could have said at full volume. Don't stand there and tell me what should and shouldn't matter to me. Don't you dare decide that for me. I'm being practical, Nora. You're being a coward. The word fell between us in the quiet kitchen. I turned and looked at her. She was still standing by the table, her wet coat dripping slow drops onto the floorboards. Her brown eyes fixed on mine with a steadiness that was almost unbearable. She wasn't angry, not exactly. She was something more difficult than angry. She was clear. Completely, unflinchingly clear. The way a person gets when they have burned through every layer of politeness and arrived at the plain truth of a thing. You are the bravest man I know, she said. And her voice had dropped, soft and low and absolutely direct. You run this land alone. You held your family together after your father died without asking a single person for help. You are good and steady and honest in ways that most men in this county only pretend to be when people are watching. She paused. And you are a complete coward about this. My throat tightened. You stepped back from the well, she said. And you never told me why. You built a wall 8 months thick and you never told me why. You packed a bag and made plans to leave before sunrise and you were never going to tell me why. She took one step toward me. So tell me now. Not for me. For you. Because you are going to carry this to Caldwell County and it is going to follow you there. And you are going to spend the rest of your life in another version of this same empty kitchen, and you know it. The rain. The candle guttering low on the table. Scout shifting in his sleep near the door. The silence of a man standing at the edge of the most important sentence of his life. I pulled back at the well, I said, and my voice came out rough, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to stop. Nora didn't move. Didn't breathe. Or if she did, I couldn't hear it over the rain. And I couldn't start something I had no right to start. You're Edmund Calloway's daughter. You're going to have a life that amounts to something. You deserve someone who can give you the kind of future that... Cole, that isn't debt and hard ground and a man who eats supper alone and doesn't know what to do with. Cole. I stopped. What? I said. With what? She asked quietly. Finish it. Say the whole true thing. I looked at her, and the wall, the one I had built so carefully, so responsibly, so convincingly over 8 months of early mornings and hard work and isolation, cracked. Not loudly, Not dramatically. The way ice cracks in early spring, from within, when the thaw has finally reached all the way to the center. With how much I feel, I said. I don't know how to feel something halfway, Nora. I never have. And a man who has nothing to offer has no business feeling everything. The room was absolutely still. Then Nora Calloway crossed the kitchen. She stopped directly in front of me. Close, the way she'd been at the well, close enough that I could see the rain still caught in her eyelashes like tiny jewels in the candlelight. And she looked up at me with those steady, honest brown eyes and she said, "Cole Ramsey, you have spent 8 months deciding what you're worth without once asking me what I think you're worth." I said nothing. There was nothing left in me to say. "I don't want my father's life," she said softly. "I don't want ribbon and comfort and a man chosen for me by committee. I want a real life. I want someone who shows up every single day and means it. Someone honest. Someone who works hard and loves hard and makes me feel like this world is worth all the trouble of being in it." Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. "You make me feel that way. You have for a long time. Not because of what you have, Cole. Because of who you are." I could feel my own heartbeat. "I'm not asking you to be more than you are," she said. "I'm asking you to stop running from it." And there it was. The whole simple truth of it, said plainly in a rain-soaked kitchen at 1 a.m. by a woman in an improperly laced pair of boots who had ridden through the dark to say it. I had spent 8 months building a wall to protect her from me. And she had ridden through a Texas rainstorm to knock it down with 7 words and a pair of honest brown eyes. I reached up, slowly, the way you move when you're afraid the moment might shatter if you're not careful. And I tucked the loose strand of rain-damp hair back from her cheek. She went very still, just watching me, just waiting. "I don't know how to be small about you," I said. My voice was quiet, quieter than I'd said anything in a long time. That's the whole truth of it. I don't know how to feel something halfway. And I was so sure, so completely sure, that a man who feels everything and has nothing was the worst thing I could hand you. "And now," she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. "Now I think the worst thing I could hand you," I said, was 8 months of silence and a note left on a kitchen table. Something moved across her face. Relief and heartbreak and something else. Something brighter than both. "Don't go to Caldwell County," she said. "No," I said. "I won't." And I didn't. That was the night everything changed. Quietly, without drama. In a rain-soaked kitchen in Ember Creek, Texas, with a candle burning low and a sleeping dog by the door, and the rain falling steady outside like it was washing something clean. We talked until the rain stopped and the sky began to gray at the edges and the first birds started their business in the cedar trees. We talked the way 2 people talk when they've been holding things back for long enough that the release of it feels physical, careful at first, and then easier, and then with the particular freedom of people who have decided to be honest and found that honesty, despite its reputation, doesn't actually hurt the way they thought it would. She told me she'd known something was different at the well. That she'd spent 3 months afterward wondering if she'd imagined the whole thing before accepting that she hadn't. That the 8 months of silence had been the strangest kind of pain. Not sharp but cumulative, the way cold gets into you slowly and then all at once. I told her about my father. About the loneliness I'd gotten so used to that I'd stopped registering it as loneliness and started calling it normal. About the way her open-door questions had undone me not because they were bold but because they were gentle, and gentleness had found nothing in me to push against. She listened the way she always listened. Fully present, without rushing to fill the pauses, letting things land. At some point the candle burned out and we sat in the dark for a moment and then I lit another one, and that small act, the ordinary domestic act of lighting a candle in the dark so the conversation could continue, felt like the most significant thing I had done in years. June came downstairs at 6:30, bleary-eyed and still feverish, wrapped in a quilt, and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway when she saw us both at the table with 2 empty coffee cups and the morning light beginning to come gold through the window. She looked at Nora. She looked at me. She looked at the travel documents on the table, still sitting there but somehow no longer in charge of anything. And then she sat down in one of the 3 chairs that had never been sat in, pulled her quilt tighter around her and said, "I want coffee and I want somebody to start from the beginning." Nora laughed. It was the best sound I had heard in 8 months. Maybe longer. It moved through the kitchen like light moves through a curtain, warm and sudden and making everything look different. I got up and put the kettle on. And that was that. Edmund Calloway shook my hand outside the church on a Saturday in September with the whole of Ember Creek watching and the September sky so blue it hurt to look at. And he held my hand in both of his for a long moment without speaking. And when he finally did speak, he said only, "Take care of her, son." And I said, "Yes, sir. Every day. That's a promise." Nora stood beside me in a cream dress with wildflowers in her hair. Not the fancy imported kind from a catalog, but the real ones, the ones that grow at the edge of the Ramsey property where the land meets the cedar trees. And she was smiling the way she always smiled, with her whole face and nothing held back, the way she did everything. Fully. Without apology. June cried through the entire ceremony and told everyone afterward it was dust. Nobody believed her. The Callaway General Store got a new sign that October, hand-lettered by Pete Harlan's boy who had a gift for it, and it read Callaway and Ramsey, General Store and Apothecary, and underneath in smaller letters, established in truth, which was Nora's idea and which I pretended to think was too sentimental right up until the moment I saw it hanging above the door and felt something in my chest go warm and full and permanent. We kept the ranch. We kept the store. It was more work than either of us had planned for, and neither of us ever said so, and I think that was because neither of us thought of it as burden. Work done alongside the right person doesn't feel the same as work done alone. I know that now. I learned it the hard way I learn most things. On cold evenings in October and November, when the Ember Creek sky went that particular shade of purple and gold that it gets in the hour before dark, we sat on the porch together the way we used to stand there in the time before the well. Except now there was no almost in it, no unspoken thing sitting heavily between us. She read. I watched the ridge. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we said nothing at all, and the silence was a different kind of silence than any I had lived in before. Not empty, not hollow, not the silence of a house with too many chairs and only one person to sit in them. It was the silence of two people who have said the hard true things to each other and have nothing left to hide. One evening in late October she looked up from her book and said, "Would you have left? If I hadn't come that night?" I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, not with hurt, but with the particular gravity of someone who understands the full weight of what they prevented. "Good thing I came then," she said. I looked at her in the fading light. This woman who had ridden through a rainstorm at 1 a.m. in improperly laced boots to knock on the door of a stubborn, lonely, wall-building man and demand the truth from him. This woman who had refused, absolutely, completely refused, to let fear win on behalf of both of us. "Best thing that ever knocked on my door," I said. She smiled and went back to her book. I watched the ridge until the last of the gold went out of the sky, and the world felt permanent again. Not the permanent of a man who is resigned to his solitude and has made his peace with it, but the permanent of something built right on honest ground by two people who chose it clearly and completely, with their eyes wide open and the truth between them where it belonged. Ember Creek settled into winter, the way it always did, slowly, with the smell of cedar smoke and cold clay and the cattle calls fading early in the shortened afternoons. The townspeople went about their business. Old Pete Harlan's boy painted a mural on the side of the feed store. The church bell rang 3 times every Sunday morning and didn't apologize for waking anyone. Everything in Ember Creek felt like it had always been there. And in the warm kitchen of the Ramsey Ranch, with the fire going and Scout asleep by the door and Nora's voice asking a question I was actually answering this time. Fully, honestly, walking through the open door instead of pulling back from it, so did I. Cole Ramsey, 34 years old, rancher, husband, a man who had learned the long and painful and ultimately beautiful way that the bravest thing you can do is not the thing you do in daylight when everyone is watching. It is the thing you finally say at 1 a.m. in a rain-soaked kitchen to a woman who rode through the dark to hear it. It is the truth, just the truth, and letting it be enough.